All right, folks, what's going on? We are back with another CCNA initiative session. And today we'll be going over what we went over before within our theory session. And this is the section in chapter 6 that went over enabling IPv4 for remote access. All right. So let's go ahead and just go over just enabling IPv4, right? Because I think we've seen enough of how to enable remote access. I'm going to show you guys today on how to enable IPv4 specifically on a switch, right? Because typically, right, from a theoretical level, right, a switch performs layer 2 function. It wasn't until in the last little bit of the years, right, is that when a switch was able to do layer 3 functions as well, which turned it into a multi-layer switch. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that today. Please take notes. This is real fun stuff. Actually will help you with your real job. And of course, will make sense of a lot of things that you guys probably are unsure about. Okay. So we're going to do some configuring. I'm going to try to make this quick. But if something doesn't make sense, please let me know. So let's go ahead and I believe I have that opened up already. All right, so we have R1, right? R1 is our router, right? Because we need that layer 3 instance in place that's going to mitigate traffic between the local area network, okay? So let's go ahead and configure that, right? So I started out in user exec mode, right? Even though the chapter is mostly about a switch, right? The CLI is the same between a switch and a router, right? Still Cisco, still same iOS, okay? So of course, as soon as we log in, as always, as I taught you guys before, as a little bit of review, we're gonna, as soon as we get into the device, it's gonna bring us straight into user exec mode. And that greater than sign tells you that we're in user exec mode, right? Putting enable, of course, in this sense, I shorthanded and put en, brought me into privilege exec mode. And privilege exec mode is indicated by a pound sign or a number sign, whatever you want to call it, right? Since I want to make changes, right, to this device, I need to make it globally, okay? So I need to go ahead and go to global global config mode, okay? To do that, I'll go ahead and put config terminal, okay? And let's go ahead and give it a host name. I believe I called it R1 in the lab, right? And then we are going to work off one of its interfaces. Let's check the interfaces, right? That command, and let me not throw too much at you. So I wanted to go back to privilege exec mode so I can do the show command, okay? So I'm going to do show IP interface brief. And what this does is give me a view of all the interfaces on this device, okay? All right, so gigabit 0, gigabit 1, 2, and 3, right? And they're all administratively down by default. When we talk about routers in the future, I'll explain why that is. But just know by default, router booted up, all the interfaces is going to be disabled by default, right? They're all going to have that shutdown command under it. All right, so let's go ahead and configure an IP address on it and enable it. All right, so we're going back into global config mode. We are going to go into interface configuration mode, and we're going to choose interface 0/0. Okay, we're going to give it an IP address, my favorite network space, right? Make it a /24, and I'm going to enable the interface. How I enable the interface, just as a reminder, I'm going to do a no shutdown because the command previously is to make it administratively down is a shutdown. So I'm going to reverse that by putting a no shutdown. Okay. And then you guys should see a syslog message pop up, right? You see that syslog message popped up saying, hey, interface 0/0 is back up. So we're good, right? We're up. We have everything we need, right? Let's go ahead and save our configuration, right? Because that's all I need so far. All right. So now let's go ahead and connect to our switch, right? All right, perfect, right? And so again, by default, as a reminder, guys, our switch by default out of the box works at layer 2. Okay, I believe I have that switch ready, up and running. Let's take a look at that. I want to close that because we got to configure some things. And this is where we're going to do our configuration of enabling IPv4 on a switch. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and make our way to global config mode and make our changes. All right. Change our name. Perfect. All right. So by default, I want to check something real quick, right? Because configuring IPv4 on a switch, we can do it one of two ways. We can do it actually on the physical interface, right? Similar to a router, or we can do it virtually, right? By using software, right? Today, and of course, what I explained in the chapter, so you guys can make sense of it, it does it virtually, right? Just like how we have virtual local area networks, right? Or VLANs, right? We can create virtual layer 3 instances or switch virtual interfaces, right? And that's what we're going to do today, right? That's what the theory talk was about last week. Let's go ahead and do that, right? First, the big rule, right, about creating a switch virtual interface, right, creating that layer 3 instance is we need to make sure that we have a layer 2 instance before we create that layer 3 instance. Okay, what does that mean, right? In simple terms, we need to make sure the VLAN exists before we create the layer 3 interface for that VLAN, right? So we're going to work with VLAN 1 today. Okay. So let's check VLAN 1. So VLAN brief, right? And this command, of course, shows all the VLANs that's configured on this switch, right? And of course, brief at the end takes out some stuff that we don't need to take a look at. Okay. So we got VLAN 1, VLAN 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. These you don't need to worry about. This is a lot of legacy stuff. So please don't worry about that, right? We're worried about VLAN 1, right? This VLAN right here. So we have our layer 2 instance. Okay. We have a layer 2 instance, right? It exists on the switch. Okay. Right. And so if I went ahead, right, we have Ryan's PC, right? This is his new Linux box. And apparently Ryan loves Linux now, right? If we plug him in, right, to this network, right, and we give his Linux box, right, we go ahead and give his Linux box an IP address in that same subnet, right? Go ahead, right? We change the network settings, all right? Let's go ahead and set this up, right? IPv4. Let's give it an address, 10.10.10.50, right? 255, 255.0, right? And the gateway is .1, right? We got that, right? 8.8.8.8, right? Automatic, okay? All right. Of course, Linux, you can set the routes too, but we're not going to do all that. We're good, right? And once we do that, we should be able to go to terminal, right? Check our config, right? It'll probably take a second. It'll probably take a second for those configs to match up. There we go. Boom. Turn it back on. There we go. There we go. Perfect. All right. So now let's do an if config. Perfect. All right. So we have our IP address configured. We have everything configured. So if I go ahead, try to pick the gateway that's on that router, right? That's doing layer 3. It should work, right? Right? And it works because I have my layer 3 instance, right? that's on the router, right? And I only have my layer 2 instance on the I only have that layer 3 instance on the router. I have only a layer 2 instance on the switch. But let's go ahead and enable a layer 3 instance on that switch, right? Because this is what this lab is for. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and configure that, right? So we have a layer 2 instance, VLAN 1 is good. Let's configure that switch virtual interface. So first, right, to configure that, we're going to put interface, right? Let's go ahead and question mark it. And you know what? Let's bring it back so we can make it simple. All right, give you guys a fresh terminal, right? So first you would type interface, right? Because that's what we're creating, right? But we have all these options, right? All these things we can create, right? What we're worried about is right here, right? We're worried about a VLAN, okay? So we're gonna put in VLAN, right? And of course, after that, it gives us the option to put a VLAN interface number, right? And I know that, VLAN interface number, that can be, that can mean a lot of things. Simply, what the VLAN interface number is, it's the number of that actual VLAN, right? So let's say you want to create a switch virtual interface or a layer 3 instance for VLAN 20, right? Maurice would go ahead and to create that layer 3 instance, he would go ahead and put interface VLAN 20. If his VLAN, right, his layer 2 instance of that is already created, right? And I'll get to that in a little bit, right? So we're going to go to interface VLAN 1, okay, right? As you can see, of course, the syslog is going to tell us, hey, you created VLAN, interface VLAN 1 exists now, right? But of course, it's in a down state, right? So let's go ahead, assign an IP address, right? The same subnet. Whoops, look at me. There we go. All right, so we gave an IP address, right? But as always, like I tell you guys, we need to go ahead and do one thing before we can get it to start working. First, let's take a look at the configuration, all right? So we created that layer 3 interface, but what we see here is this, right? Just like I told you guys about on that router, right? By default, a layer 3 instance, right? Whether you configure it or not, is always going to be configured in a shutdown state, okay? Right? In Cisco documentation, and of course, theoretically from a lot of distinguished engineers, they don't like to call this a security concept, but they do this, right? Because you wouldn't want somebody coming in, plugging in something, and it start routing traffic. Okay, so it takes an actual administrator, an actual technician, to tell the router or the layer 3 instance what you want it to do, right? So before we can, be able to reach this, use this, or what have you, you need to go ahead and enable it, right? To go ahead and enable it, we just do the reverse. We do a no shutdown, right? And after that, we should see a syslog message pop up. Perfect. And it has changed to up, okay? So now that we took care of that, there's actually one more thing that we need to do. So the switch in this case is not the router, right? We have R1, that is a router, right? The switch now that Maurice went ahead and gave it an IP address, it is now a host, right? Similar to like a PC, right? On the network, right? It has an IP address, but we also need to make sure we configure a gateway so it knows where to send traffic, and it can, send traffic between different networks as well, right? So we need to make sure whatever we do enable IPv4 for a switch, we can figure that as well, okay? And to do that, we would go ahead and put in this command, IP default gateway, right? And then preceding that, we go ahead and put the IP address of that default gateway, okay? All right, so we took care of that, right? Of course, we can also, right, like in host, we can go ahead and configure a DNS server, right, for this. And for this, just an example, I'm going to put 8.8.8.8, right? But just like a PC, right? I know you guys are used to, Windows. Some of you guys work with Linux as well, but you can do multiple, right? Multiple, DNS servers, right? Right? You have a maximum of 6, but we're going to do 8 for now, right? Just for configuration purposes. All right. So now that we configured that, we took care of it. Let's save our configuration, right? Right. Let's verify our configuration, right? Let's get out of global config mode and go back to privilege. All right. It's more clear there. Let's do a show run. And let's make sure that we took care of everything on our configuration list, right? Right. So on our configuration list that we spoke about on our theory, step 1, right? Use the interface VLAN 1 command in global configuration mode to enter interface VLAN 1 configuration mode. We did, right? And we configured an IP address, right? We used, of course, which is, of course, in step 2, use the IP address command to go ahead and configure an IP address in a subnet mask to this switch virtual interface. We took care of that. We made sure that we did put a no shutdown, as you guys saw, right? So we can go ahead and enable this interface, right? We made sure we put a default gateway, right? We made sure we did that so we can go ahead and talk within the network and, of course, outside of the network, right? Since it is now a host, right, and not a router. And, of course, optionally, step 5, we went ahead and added DNS, right? The DNS option on this device, right? So if I go ahead, do a show IP route, right? We have all of these things here, right? This does not mean the switch is a router, right? This does not mean that. We still have our router in place, okay? This just means this is the routing table for the switch has a host, okay? So let's go ahead and get back into Ryan's computer. And let's try to see if we can reach the switch that Maurice configured. Boom. We can still reach it. It's all good. And remember, right, our network configuration shows us what, right? We still have our gateway, right, being .1, which is R1, okay? The switch that Maurice configured is just another host in the network, right? Think of it just as another PC, right? So that's it. That's how you enable IPv4 on a switch. Of course, in my PowerPoint, it goes over what you do, what you need to configure to make it work. You also have the option, right? You don't have to configure this switch virtual interface manually. You do have the option to use DHCP, right? And of course, the command after that is IP address DHCP. We would configure a DHCP server on our router, and it can, of course, it can get it that way, right? So it does have that option because, again, it is a host on the network. Okay, so that is possible, what have you. So, and just as a reminder, let me bring this over here, right? Here's how it looks, right? Of course, configure IP address DHCP. We go here to of course, verify. We can see, hey, the DHCP lease, we got it here, et cetera, boom. Okay. So that's it, guys, right? That's your enable IPv4 on a switch. This is all under the chapter of basic switch management, right? We went over remote access. We went over a lot of things. We have one more topic in this chapter to discuss, and we'll be done with chapter 6. All right. Well, guys, thank you for attending, and you guys have a great day.
All right, you too, bro.